What would you do if a complete stranger left you a $20,000 check without saying a word? Without any explanation, she finds a $20,000 check at the drive-thru, left by a man who never spoke more than necessary. He disappears into the night, leaving behind a mystery she can't ignore. Why did he do it? What's behind such a generous and unexpected gesture? But when she finally uncovers the truth, what he reveals is something no one could have predicted. Watch until the end to understand how this strange act is connected to something much bigger and more painful than she ever imagined. The soft sound of the cash register keys echoed in the small space of the drive-thru as Alessa McConnell wrapped up another order. It was late at night at Green Goodness, and the rush had started to dwindle. The healthy fast food restaurant felt calm, but inside Alessa, emotional chaos was building like an impending storm. She looked out the drive-thru window, watching Ethan Darnell's car, parked as usual. He was a customer who came almost at the same time every night, a man of few words. His order was always the same: grilled chicken wrap, quinoa salad, and a bottle of water. Alessa wondered how someone could live such a rigid routine, but maybe he had his own demons just like she did. "Grilled chicken wrap and quinoa salad plus a water," she repeated to herself, carefully packing the food. As she handed over the order, she flashed her typical professional smile. "Here's your meal, Ethan," she said, not expecting much more than his usual murmur. "Thank you," he replied, as brief as ever. However, something caught Alessa's attention when he handed over the cash. Along with the bills, there was a simple, discreet envelope. Her name was handwritten on the back. Furrowing her brow, she took the envelope automatically. He had already driven off, disappearing into the night. A chilly breeze swept through the drive-thru window, causing Alessa to shiver for a moment. Something didn't feel right. Alessa couldn't take her eyes off the envelope as she pressed it against her chest. The name written on it bothered her. She took a few steps back, moving away from the window and into the kitchen area where she could have a moment of privacy. Her heart raced, as if it already knew something significant was about to happen. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside, there was no letter or reassuring words, just a check, $20,000. Ethan Darnell's name signed in the corner. Alessa instinctively recoiled as if the piece of paper were poisoned. She blinked several times, trying to process what she was seeing. "Is this real?" she whispered to herself. She looked around as if expecting someone to appear and say it was a mistake, a cruel joke. She knew the amount was legitimate. The paper, the signature, everything seemed authentic. But what confused her was the why. She was struggling to keep her home, to support Emery, her 12-year-old daughter. But how could Ethan, someone who barely exchanged 2 words with her, know that? The relief of having the money in her hands quickly gave way to an uncomfortable feeling. Why would he do this? She thought repeatedly. Every time she tried to find an answer, more questions arose. Was it a gesture of kindness, or was there something behind it? With the check in hand, Alessa ran to the window, but Ethan's car was already too far away, swallowed by the night. Driving home that night was a blur. Alessa's mind was so filled with questions that she barely noticed the familiar route. The small neighborhood where she lived seemed too serene for the turmoil swirling within her. As soon as she opened the door to her house, she found Emery asleep on the couch, surrounded by schoolbooks, a nearly empty mug of hot chocolate beside her. She sighed at the sight of her daughter, feeling the weight of everything she had been facing in recent months. Between the bills, the grief of losing Finn, her husband, and the responsibility of being the sole provider for Emery, things were becoming unbearable. And now, this check, $20,000, the amount that could save her home, pay off overdue bills, and maybe even provide some stability for a while. Alessa walked to the dining table, dropping the check on it, and let exhaustion take over her body. She sat in the chair, her eyes fixed on the piece of paper, trying to make sense of it all. Why did Ethan do this? The question echoed in her mind. The gesture was too grand, too unexpected to come from someone she barely knew. She looked at Emery, sleeping peacefully, and tears welled up in her eyes. The pressure and anxiety of the past few months finally broke the dam of emotions she had been trying to hide. Alessa wanted to accept the money, use it to give her daughter the future she had always dreamed of, but something in her heart told her she needed to understand the why before moving forward. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was hiding something, that there was more behind that check than just a generous gesture. As the tears streamed down her face, she forced herself to think, what did he expect in return? Was there a price for accepting that money? Or was it simply an incomprehensible kindness from a man she didn't truly know? The questions kept her awake, and the check remained there on the table, a constant reminder that her life was about to change, but she didn't know how or why. Alessa stared at the check, feeling that the answer to the mystery of Ethan Darnell was closer than she imagined. But would she be able to uncover the reason behind such a grand gesture? And would she be prepared for the answers that would come? In the days that followed, the $20,000 check remains on the table, unchanged, a constant presence that Alessa cannot ignore. Every morning she walks past it, feeling its invisible weight. The money could solve so many problems, but the mystery behind Ethan Darnell's gesture consumes her. She can't get him out of her head, and as much as she wants to, she can't simply accept the check without understanding why. At Green Goodness, Alessa's routine continues as usual, but her mind is elsewhere. Every time she sees Ethan through the drive-thru window, her curiosity only deepens. He places his usual order, speaks as little as possible, and disappears as if he were merely a shadow in her life. Alessa tries everything to find out more about him without being too obvious. "Do you know Ethan Darnell?" she asks a co-worker between orders while both are at the counter folding wrappers. The co-worker shrugs with a disinterested expression. "He's been coming here for months, always the same thing. Chicken wrap, quinoa salad, water, never talks much, in fact he hardly speaks at all." The response, or lack thereof, frustrates Alessa. With each attempt, Ethan's story seems more shrouded in mystery. How could someone show up so often, feel so familiar, yet be a complete stranger? She tries not to seem obvious, but she asks more people on the team. The answers are always the same. No one knows who he is beyond being a regular customer. What Alessa discovers, however, is the emptiness that Ethan carries with him, as if it were part of his very identity. As the days go by, the check on her kitchen table remains untouched, and every time Alessa looks at it, her questions grow more intense. Why did he do this? What does he want in return? Who is Ethan Darnell? Unable to shake the questions from her mind, Alessa decides to seek out Violet Ellis, an elderly woman known for being the living memory of Oakwood. Violet is always at the local church, participating in community events, and knowing everything that happens in town. If anyone knows something about Ethan, it would be her. One afternoon, Alessa walks to the church, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. The sound of people conversing softly echoes through the small chapel. But what Alessa is looking for is Violet, sitting in the last pew with her calm and welcoming demeanor. "Violet," Alessa calls hesitantly as she approaches. The elderly woman smiles at her, gesturing for her to sit beside her. "What can I do for you, dear?" Violet asks, her voice soft and gentle. Alessa, unsure of where to begin, takes a deep breath. "Do you know Ethan Darnell?" she asks, trying to mask her nervousness. Violet seems to think for a moment, her gaze drifting away before finally responding. "Yes, I know him," she says, her tone shifting slightly. "He lost his wife, Anne, to cancer a few years ago. Since then, he's withdrawn from everyone. Before that, he was a doctor, a good doctor. But after Anne died, he just stopped." Violet's words hit Alessa hard. A doctor? He gave it all up because of grief? The pieces slowly start to fit together in Alessa's mind. Ethan wasn't just a quiet, solitary man who visited the restaurant. He carried a deep sorrow, a burden that no one could see just by looking at him. "I think he's still trying to deal with it," Violet continues, looking at Alessa with a thoughtful expression. "Losing someone so close can change everything. Sometimes people shut down, isolate themselves, trying to figure out how to keep living." Alessa feels a lump in her throat. Now things begin to make more sense. Ethan wasn't just giving her money for the sake of it. He was trying to connect in some way, perhaps not even knowing how. But this only made the mystery more troubling. Why did he choose her for this gesture? Still reeling from what she heard from Violet, Alessa hesitates for a moment before asking the question she really wants to know. Do you have his contact information? The question comes out softly, almost a whisper, as if Alessa is afraid of crossing an invisible line. Violet looks at Alessa with an understanding gaze, as if she already knows what is going through the young mother's mind. She hesitates for a moment, but then with a sigh says, "I do have it, but I don't know if he will respond to you, Alessa. He's a man who has withdrawn from everything, and I've never seen him make an exception. But if there's anyone who might be able to reach him, maybe it's you." With trembling hands, Alessa takes the piece of paper Violet hands her. Ethan's number is there, scribbled in careful handwriting. She thanks Violet and leaves the church with her heart racing. As she walks back home, Alessa tries to process everything she has learned. The check, Ethan's story, the loss of his wife. Each step brings her closer to the answers she so desperately seeks, but at the same time it awakens a fear in her chest. Ethan had gone through such deep pain, and she wondered if she should really reach out. What if she disturbed something he was trying to keep buried? Arriving home, she looks once again at the check on the table. Now that piece of paper carries a new weight. It wasn't just a sum of money, it was a symbol of something deeper, a connection that Alessa still didn't fully comprehend. She holds the paper with Ethan's number between her fingers, hesitating. She wants answers, but at the same time she fears the questions she needs to ask. Would Ethan respond? And if he did, what would she discover? With Ethan Darnell's number in hand, Alessa is closer to the answers than she has ever been. But as she stares at the phone, she wonders, how far is she willing to go? And when she finally reaches out to Ethan, will she be ready for the truths he might reveal?
Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment. It's really important for the growth of the channel and helps me bring more stories like this. Now, let's move on to the next part of the story.
At home, Alessa sits at the kitchen table, the phone resting in front of her. She stares at the screen for long minutes, feeling the weight of Ethan's number and the check still lying there on the table. Hesitation paralyzes her. What should she say? How does one approach someone they barely know, yet who changed their life in an instant? Questions swirl in her mind, and the uncertainty of what's to come leaves her tense. Finally, she takes a deep breath and picks up her phone, typing a short message. Nothing too elaborate, just sincere. She needs to understand. "Ethan, I don't know how to thank you for the check. It's going to change our lives, but I need to know. Why did you do this?" She hesitates for a second, her thumb hovering over the send button. Then, with a mix of relief and dread, she presses it. The silence that follows is overwhelming. Alessa feels her heart racing as she fixates on the phone. Seconds tick by, and nothing. Then minutes. She starts to wonder if Ethan will even respond. Maybe he never expected her to reach out, or perhaps he regretted doing something so grand. Her thoughts are interrupted by the sound of a notification. She looks at her phone, nervous, and there it is. His reply. "I'm glad I could help. It wasn't much." Alessa exhales the breath she didn't realize she was holding. But Ethan's response doesn't satisfy her. It's vague, almost indifferent, as if he wants to steer clear of the true reason. In the following days, Alessa and Ethan begin to exchange messages more frequently, but always in a brief and contained manner. Ethan remains distant, as if avoiding any deeper connection. But Alessa senses there's something in his responses that reveals an underlying vulnerability. He's trying to keep the walls up, but she notices small cracks forming. Deciding to take a risk, she shares part of her own story in a message. She talks about Finn, her husband, and how she lost him in a car accident. She recounts the last words Finn spoke before leaving, asking to be saved, saying he needed to take care of Alessa and their daughter Emery. With every word typed, Alessa feels the weight of her own pain resurface, but at the same time, there's a certain relief in putting it out there. Ethan's reply takes a while to come, but when it finally does, it's short, as always. "I'm sorry for your loss." It almost seems mechanical, but there's something there, an implicit sadness that Alessa picks up on. She doesn't give up. She continues the conversation, trying to find common ground between them. She can feel, even if subtly, that Ethan knows the weight of loss, that the pain of losing someone he loved has deeply affected him. Ethan responds, always with few words, but an invisible connection starts to form. Alessa realizes they are bonding through their pain. It's not something verbalized, but they both understand what it means to live with the absence of those they love. Their exchanges become a silent escape, where they can share a bit of their wounds without fully diving into them. Days pass, and Alessa feels the need to dig deeper. Ethan's responses aren't enough. She wants to understand more about what happened to him, what led him to make such drastic choices, like abandoning everything, leaving medicine, and somehow connecting with her through such a grand gesture. He helped save her and Emery's lives with that check, but there's more behind it. She needs to know. Finally, on a cold, quiet night, Alessa decides to be more direct. She looks at her phone and types, "Do you want to tell me what happened to you?" Nervousness washes over her. Alessa knows she's approaching sensitive territory and fears this question might push him away for good. But she can't ignore her need to understand who Ethan truly is. The silence on the other end seems to stretch into eternity. She begins to think he won't respond this time. Maybe she's gone too far, crossed a line. But then her phone vibrates. She looks at the screen and reads his reply, simple yet devastating. "My wife, Anne, died of cancer. I was a doctor. I tried everything, but I couldn't save her. After that, I left medicine and life behind." The words hit Alessa like a knife to the chest. The weight of Ethan's pain, now clearly exposed, is almost unbearable. He didn't just lose the most important person in his life, he also lost himself in the process. The revelation explains so much: the distance, the solitude, the reason he closed himself off from the world. She takes a deep breath, absorbing the depth of what she just read. Alessa knew there was something painful behind Ethan's gesture, but now, with the truth laid bare before her, she feels his burden as if it were her own. There's no more room for empty questions or attempts to keep things superficial. Now Ethan's pain stands between them, real and palpable. Alessa feels an urgency to know more, to understand how Ethan's life fell apart to such a degree. But she also wonders, is he ready to face all of this? And more importantly, is she prepared for what comes next when they finally meet face to face? The messages exchanged between Alessa and Ethan have become a refuge for both of them. She begins to find solace in their daily exchanges, something she hadn't expected. The simple act of sharing their stories, their pains, and their silences creates a connection that goes beyond words. On a rainy night, Alessa sits on the sofa, the sound of rain tapping against the windows providing a tranquil backdrop for her conversation with Ethan. She is writing another message to him when she notices Emery approaching. The girl throws herself onto the sofa beside her mother with a curious look. "You've been talking a lot with this man, Mom. Who is he?" Alessa, picking up on the playful tone in her daughter's voice, smiles, but there's a hint of seriousness in her reply. "He's someone who understands," she says, not taking her eyes off her phone. "Someone who has been through a lot, someone who might need a little understanding too." Emery, though she doesn't fully grasp it, accepts her mother's answer. But inside Alessa, a doubt begins to grow. Despite the comfort she feels in their conversations, she senses that Ethan still maintains certain barriers. He has shared about Anne, about the devastating loss he faced, but Alessa feels there are still parts of his story hidden away, things he isn't ready to reveal, and that makes her question how far she can or should go in this connection. The next morning, the sound of a new message awakens Alessa. Still lying in bed, she picks up her phone, thinking it's some trivial notification. But upon seeing the sender, she sits up quickly, eyes wide. The message is from Ethan. "I'm thinking about reopening my clinic." Alessa reads the message several times, trying to process what it means. Ethan, the man who had left medicine due to his grief, is now considering a return. A wave of hope washes over her. She replies quickly, her fingers barely keeping up with her thoughts. "You should do it. You have a gift, Ethan. You can't waste that." On the other end, Ethan's response comes with a more cautious tone. "I don't know if I'm ready. What if I fail again?" Alessa feels the weight of that doubt, but she knows he is referring to much more than just medicine. He is talking about the fear of reliving failure, the same that has paralyzed him since Anne's death. Carefully, she writes, "You can't blame yourself for what happened to Anne. You did everything you could, and now maybe it's time to help others. Not because of the past, but because the world needs people like you." She sends the message and waits. Ethan takes a while to respond, but when he does, Alessa feels the shift. "Maybe you're right. I'll think about it." And with those few words, she realizes something in Ethan is changing, albeit slowly. The idea that he might eventually reclaim his role as a doctor makes her smile. Who knows, she thinks, maybe he is finally allowing himself to step out of the shadows. Days pass, and Alessa continues her routine at Green Goodness, still thinking about her messages with Ethan. He had remained more reserved in recent days, but she recognizes that the mere fact he has considered reopening his clinic is already a significant step. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, while Alessa is packing an order, she sees something that makes her freeze for a moment. Ethan is entering the restaurant. Her heart races at the sight of him. It has been months since he last showed up in person. Ethan appears hesitant, as if he doesn't quite know what to do or how to act, but he walks toward her with slow, measured steps. Alessa finishes the order she is wrapping up and steps out from behind the counter. "Ethan," she says, surprised but also smiling softly. He gives a slight nod, his expression serious but less closed off than she remembers. "Can we talk?" he asks. Alessa agrees and leads him to a table in the corner, away from the restaurant's bustle. They sit down, and for a moment a heavy silence hangs between them. Ethan seems to gather strength before finally speaking. "I always thought that if I had done more, Anne would still be alive," he begins, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I tried everything, all the treatments, all the alternatives, but nothing worked. She died, and that destroyed me." He doesn't look directly at Alessa as he speaks, but the words come out sincere and raw. Alessa watches him, feeling a deep compassion for him. She knows his pain is immense, but hearing it from his lips hits her differently. She leans slightly toward him and in a spontaneous gesture holds his hand. Ethan is taken aback by the touch but doesn't pull away. "You didn't fail, Ethan," she says firmly but gently. "You did what you could. Sometimes we can't save everyone." She hesitates but continues, "But you saved someone today. You saved me. That check, it changed everything. I was on the brink of losing everything, unable to take care of Emery, and you gave me a second chance." Ethan finally looks her in the eyes, clearly touched by her words. "I don't know what to say," he murmurs, still trying to process the weight of what Alessa has just admitted. She smiles softly, squeezing his hand one last time before letting it go. "You've already said everything you needed to." They lock eyes for a few more seconds, in a silence that is no longer uncomfortable but filled with understanding. For the first time, Ethan feels that someone truly comprehends what he carries, and Alessa realizes that her own healing may very well come from helping Ethan find his. Now, with their connection stronger than ever, the question that remains is Ethan truly ready to face the past and move forward? And Alessa? How far is she willing to go to help him on that journey? Months had passed since Ethan decided to reopen his clinic in Oakwood. News of his return to medicine quickly spread throughout the town, and soon people began to arrive seeking care. For many, Ethan's clinic became a symbol of hope. He was seen as someone who not only provided physical relief, but also emotional comfort to those in pain. The town needed this, especially after difficult times. Alessa and Emery were his first patients. Emery had a mild cough, nothing serious, but the gesture of taking her daughter there was more about supporting Ethan than anything else. Upon entering the clinic, Alessa was impressed by the welcoming environment he had created. Everything seemed to be done with purpose. It was simple yet comforting, with touches of nature in the artwork and plants scattered throughout the space. Ethan attended to Emery with professionalism, but there was a softness in his demeanor that Alessa noticed immediately. He was truly trying, to reconnect with the person he had been before everything fell apart. Still, as he explained to Alessa that there was nothing serious with Emery, she noticed the familiar sadness in his eyes. He seemed to be present physically, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in something he still couldn't overcome. Alessa smiled, thanking him for the consultation, but her mind kept going back to the pain Ethan still carried. Something about him remained broken, even with the success of the clinic. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she felt that despite everything, he still hadn't found the peace he deserved. As days passed, Ethan's clinic thrived more and more. Patients came from all over town, seeking his attentive care. But despite the professional smile he offered everyone, Alessa knew something was missing. There were moments when Ethan seemed to relax, connecting with patients, but at other times he distanced himself, as if reliving something painful. On a quiet afternoon, Alessa and Emery strolled through the town after school. The crisp autumn air made the leaves on the trees sway gently, and the small town of Oakwood was bathed in a golden light that made everything more beautiful. They passed by Ethan's clinic, where he was chatting with a patient. Alessa stopped for a moment, watching him. "Do you think he's happy, Mom?" Emery asked, breaking the silence. Alessa turned to her daughter and then looked back at Ethan. He was smiling, but it was a contained smile, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. That same sadness she had noticed before was still there, hidden behind a calm face. "I think he's healing slowly," Alessa replied, reflecting on her own words. "But happiness, that might take a bit longer." She knew that emotional healing took time and that Ethan was on his own path. As much as she wanted to see him finally at peace, she knew she couldn't rush that. There were more unspoken things, more layers of pain he still hadn't faced. As they continued their walk, Alessa couldn't help but wonder what else he was holding back. What was he still not ready to share? No matter how close she felt to him, there was something that kept her from fully reaching the heart of the matter. That night, after putting Emery to bed, Alessa sat on the couch in the living room. The silence of the house was comforting, but her mind was filled with thoughts about Ethan. It was clear he was making progress, but the feeling that he still carried an invisible burden wouldn't leave her. She glanced at her phone for a moment, wondering if she should send him a message, just to check in on how he was doing. Before she could decide, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Ethan. "I need to tell you something important about Finn." Alessa's heart stopped. Finn, her late husband. His name appeared on the screen like a ghost from the past. Alessa read the message several times, trying to process what it meant. What could Ethan possibly know about Finn? Why had he never mentioned it before? A million thoughts raced through her mind at once. Throughout all the months of conversations with Ethan, he had never spoken about Finn. Why now? And what could he possibly know? Had Finn crossed paths with Ethan in some way before the accident? The questions tumbled over one another in her head, but no clear answers emerged. Curiosity and fear took hold of Alessa simultaneously. Part of her wanted to know, but another part was terrified of what she might uncover. If Ethan had something so significant to share about Finn, it would surely change everything. She stared at her phone, feeling the tension rise. Whatever Ethan was about to reveal, she knew it wouldn't be easy to hear. The answers she had long sought were finally about to surface, but was she ready to face them? What does Ethan know about Finn? And why did he wait so long to tell her? Alessa was on the brink of discovering a truth that could change everything she thought she knew about her past. But would she be prepared for what lay ahead?
If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Your support is essential for the channel's growth and to keep sharing more emotional stories. Now let's continue with what happens next.
Alessa entered the cafe with a racing heart, sweaty palms, and a growing feeling that her meeting with Ethan would change everything. She spotted him sitting at a table by the window, his eyes fixed on a distant point, almost as if he were struggling to find the courage. Something was different about him. Ethan looked more anxious than ever, his shoulders hunched, his gaze distant and burdened with an anguish Alessa had never seen before. She sat down across from him in silence, feeling the weight of what was about to be said. Ethan remained silent for a few minutes, nervously fiddling with the coffee cup in front of him. Alessa could see the internal conflict unfolding on his face, as if each word he was about to say was a battle. Finally, he took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that morning. "I was the doctor who tried to save Finn in the hospital," he said, the words spilling out all at once, as if they had been trapped inside him for years. Alessa froze. The ground seemed to disappear beneath her feet. Ethan's words hit her like a blow she was unprepared to receive. She felt her body grow cold, her mind spinning to process what she had just heard. "You were with him?" Her voice barely escaped. Ethan nodded, his gaze now fixed on the table between them. "He was conscious. He pleaded with me to save him. He said he had a wife, a daughter, but I couldn't. I failed him, Alessa." The pain in his voice was palpable, and Alessa felt the air get ripped from her lungs. The man she had learned to trust, who had helped her in ways she never imagined, had also failed to save the person she loved most. Tears streamed silently down Alessa's face. She couldn't stop them, no matter how hard she tried. It was too much to process all at once. Ethan, the man who had given her a new chance at life and Emery's, had also been there during Finn's last moments, and at that crucial moment, he hadn't been able to save him. Ethan continued, his voice choked with the guilt he carried. "I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough. Since that day, I've carried this guilt. I bear the weight of having failed him, and you." He finally raised his eyes, and what Alessa saw in them was devastating, the weight of years of pain, regret, and a sadness he had never allowed himself to express fully. Alessa could barely breathe. The pain and confusion suffocated her. She didn't know what to feel, didn't know how to process it all. It was as if the man she knew had suddenly become someone else. She wanted to scream, cry, and at the same time, embrace him for having carried that burden alone. Finn's words returned to her mind, his last moments, the desperate words he had spoken, the plea for a chance to live to care for her and Emery. Now, knowing that Ethan had been there, listening to those same words, was something she could never have imagined. "You were with him when he—" Alessa tried to speak, but the words got lost in her tears. Ethan, visibly devastated, nodded, unable to look her in the eye. "Yes," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I was there when he left, and I've never been able to forgive myself for that." The silence that followed was suffocating. They both knew that this moment would change everything. The pain they shared in such different ways connected them in a way that no one else could understand. Alessa abruptly stood up from the table, unsure of what to say or do. The cafe around her seemed to fade away, the sounds of conversations and the environment blurring into a haze. All she could hear were Ethan's words echoing in her mind. He tried to save Finn. He was there in the last moments. He failed. The man who had helped her so much, who had rescued her from her own downfall, had also been part of the most painful chapter of her life. She began to walk away, her steps slow, but something inside her made her stop. Ethan, sitting at the table, looked smaller, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. He had his head down, as if awaiting a punishment he had already received countless times in his own mind. Alessa looked at him and for the first time realized how much guilt had destroyed him from the inside. She knew what she needed to do. She knew she couldn't let Ethan carry this burden alone. She turned around and went back to him, sitting down again across from him, but this time with a determined look. "You did what you could, Ethan," she said, her voice strong yet gentle. "Finn knew that, and I know it now. I can't blame you for something no one could prevent." Alessa reached out and held his hand tightly, forcing him to look at her. "I know how much this hurts you," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "But you need to understand. You did what you could. No one could save him." Her words, as difficult as they were to say, began to soothe the storm Ethan carried within. Tears began to stream silently down Ethan's face, as if the barrier he had built for so many years was finally breaking. He had never cried in front of anyone since Anne's death. The weight of guilt that had consumed him for so long was finally being exposed. "I tried, Alessa," he whispered, his voice choked with the pain he felt. "He begged for help, and I failed. I couldn't save him." Ethan had never said this out loud before. The words tore him apart inside, but at the same time there was a sense of relief in finally admitting them. Alessa squeezed his hand, leaning in closer. "I heard those words from Finn," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He said, 'Please save me. I have a wife and a daughter to care for.' You were with him in those last moments, and I thank you for that. It wasn't your fault. Finn is gone, but I'm still here, and now it's time for both of us to let go of this pain." For a moment, time seemed to stop between them. The cafe around them transformed into a distant blur, and all that remained was the mutual understanding of their losses. Both were wounded, but in that instant, they realized they could finally begin to heal their scars. The weight they carried couldn't be erased, but together perhaps they could lighten it. And now that all truths have been revealed, what comes next for Alessa and Ethan? Will they finally be able to leave the past behind and find a new way to live? Or will the scars be too deep to heal? Ethan slowly released Alessa's hand, as if he were finally saying goodbye to a burden that had crushed him for years. He felt the air enter his lungs differently, lighter, almost renewed. For the first time since Anne had died, he could breathe without that suffocating pain in his chest. The words Finn had once echoed in his mind like an unbearable weight finally began to dissipate. Alessa, at his side, also seemed changed. While she still felt the sting of the revelation about Finn, there was a peace in knowing that Ethan had done all he could. The forgiveness she had offered him not only brought relief to Ethan but also to herself. She hadn't realized how much of the implicit guilt Finn had left behind weighed on her. And now, freeing Ethan from that responsibility was liberating for both of them. They walked together down the street, unhurried, in silence. The fresh morning air enveloped them, and even without words, there was a deep sense of understanding between them. What they had shared at that cafe table connected them in a profound and irrevocable way. Alessa finally broke the silence. "Finn always told me that life is too short to carry the burden of what we cannot control." Ethan looked at her, absorbing the words. He didn't know much about Finn beyond the last moments they had shared, but now those words made sense. "He was right," Ethan replied, a soft smile emerging. He watched her, and for a brief moment, something he hadn't felt in a long time began to emerge within him. Hope. Hope that life, despite all its losses and failures, still had something to offer. Back at the clinic, Ethan was alone in his office, still processing everything that had happened. He felt that something inside him had changed, but the transition from grief to acceptance was slow. For years, he had avoided revisiting the memories of Anne, fearing the pain they would bring back, but in that moment, he felt he needed to confront them. He opened an old box that he hadn't touched since his wife's death. Inside were photos from the past, memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Pictures of Anne, moments of happiness he had buried, thinking he would never be able to look at them again. Each image struck him in a different way, but now the pain was not as overwhelming as it had once been. At the bottom of the box, he found a letter that Anne had left behind. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. He had ignored this letter for so long, afraid of what it might contain. But now, something inside him encouraged him to open it. Carefully, he unfolded the paper and began to read. "I know that pain will consume you," the letter read, Anne's words seeming to speak directly to Ethan's soul. "But you need to live, Ethan. Live for both of us. Heal others because that is what you do best." Tears began to well in Ethan's eyes, but this time they came with a sense of relief, of farewell. He closed his eyes, allowing the tears to flow freely. For the first time in years, he was allowing himself to say goodbye, permitting himself to move forward without the guilt of not having saved Anne. Her final words echoed in his mind. "Heal others because that is what you do best." It was a reminder of the purpose he had abandoned and was now beginning to rediscover. Weeks later, Ethan's clinic was busier than ever. Patients came from all over the community, trusting him to care for their physical and emotional pains. The waiting room was full, but the atmosphere was light, almost welcoming. Ethan had created a space where people felt cared for, not just treated, and inside he felt that he was finally healing something within himself too. Alessa arrived at the clinic that morning for a quick appointment, but upon entering, she noticed the bustle and positive energy that surrounded the place. She knew how hard Ethan had worked to get to this point, to overcome his own demons and make room for the healing of others. From a distance, she saw him talking to a patient, his genuine smile, something she hadn't seen in so long. When Ethan spotted her, his face lit up with a smile that she knew was real. It was no longer the restrained smile from months ago. There was something lighter in his expression, something Alessa recognized as the peace he had long sought. She approached him, and before he could say anything, Alessa smiled and said, "You're saving so many lives now." Ethan tilted his head, a bit shy but clearly grateful for her words. "And in a way," he replied, "you saved mine." They exchanged a deep look, needing no more words. There was no romance between them, but the bond they had formed was solid and unshakable, built on their mutual understanding of loss and the acceptance that life, although full of pain, could also be a place of healing. Together, in different ways, they found a way to move forward, carrying the memories of their loved ones with lightness and peace. Alessa and Ethan managed to find a new way to live, but would the past truly stay behind? And how would this new connection affect them as they continued to heal their wounds and help others do the same? Years have passed since that day in the cafe, when Alessa and Ethan opened their hearts and faced their deepest pains. Life has moved on, but the connection they shared has never faded. They took different paths, yet maintained a silent closeness, always linked by the journey of healing that, in a way, united them forever. Alessa, now 42, feels she has matured in ways she never thought possible. Emery, her daughter, is no longer a little girl. At 18, Emery is about to leave for college, ready to face the world on her own. In that moment, as the two sit on the porch of the home they've shared for so many years, Emery looks at her mother, her gaze reflecting the strength and independence she has inherited. "Mom, do you still miss Dad?" Emery asks without hesitation. It was a question Alessa would have struggled to answer without breaking down just a few years ago. But now, her reaction is different. She smiles sadly, a serene glint in her eyes. "Every day, sweetheart, but the pain I feel now is different from before. I've learned that pain is a part of us, and at the same time it teaches us to move forward." Emery, still trying to grasp the depth of her mother's words, reflects in silence. She has witnessed Alessa's journey up close, the nights her mother cried alone in her room, the days when it seemed like the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. And most importantly, she has seen the slow, painful, but essential transformation Alessa underwent over the years. "I think I finally understand, Mom," Emery replies with a maturity that surprises Alessa. "I don't know if I could have been as strong as you were." Alessa smiles again, but this time with pride. She realizes that despite all the hardships, she has raised a daughter capable of facing life head-on, just as she learned to do. As Alessa continues her personal journey, Ethan's clinic in Oakwood thrives. The community has rallied around him, recognizing him not just as a doctor, but as a vital pillar for everyone who needed more than just physical care. His presence has become an anchor for many, and the way he reconnected with his life's purpose transformed how he viewed the world. At the clinic, patients come and go, but the calm Ethan exudes is palpable. He moves with a serenity he didn't possess before. Now, he feels more at peace not only with his work but with himself. He has learned to cope with his losses, no longer viewing them as personal failures, but as experiences that shaped who he is today. The people in town trust Ethan in a special way, not just because he is an excellent doctor, but because they know he understands suffering on a profound level. At the end of a long day of appointments, Ethan allows himself a moment to reflect. He remembers Anne, Finn, and how the journey to arrive at this point seemed impossible at times. But now, amid the gentle sounds of conversations and laughter in the clinic's hallway, he feels he has made peace with the past. The old Ethan, the man consumed by guilt, no longer exists. In his place stands someone who has found meaning not just in his work but in the people around him. He continues to save lives, but more importantly, he has saved his own life in the process. A few weeks later, on a tranquil afternoon, Alessa is in the backyard, watering the flowers Finn had planted before he departed. The gentle spring breeze makes the leaves sway, and the distant sound of birds creates a peaceful, almost magical atmosphere. She kneels by a small flower bed where Finn's plants have blossomed with vigor. Alessa closes her eyes for a moment and takes a deep breath, feeling the breeze touch her face. For so long, she had viewed the garden as a painful reminder of Finn's absence, but now each flower seemed to symbolize the life she has managed to rebuild, not only for herself but also for Emery. Suddenly, without thinking, she whispers to herself, as if speaking directly to Finn, "I lived for both of us, Finn." Her words drift away in the wind, but she knows somehow he would hear. The tears that fall down her cheeks now are not of sadness, but of gratitude and acceptance. Alessa has finally found a way to move forward, to be strong not just for Emery, but also for herself. As the sun sets over Oakwood, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Alessa feels a profound sense of peace. She has allowed herself to forgive, to break free from the chains of the past, and to build a fulfilling life. The path was painful, yes, but she has emerged on the other side stronger, wiser, and above all, more at peace with herself. She knows Finn will always be a part of her life, just as Ethan will. Both have touched her heart in different ways, but in the end she has found the healing she so desperately needed. The garden around her flourishes, and Alessa rises, aware that her future, like Emery's, is filled with possibilities and a happiness she thought she would never feel again. And as the sun sets in Oakwood, Alessa and Ethan's journey finds its conclusion. Both have learned that no matter how tragic life may be, there is always room for redemption, reconnection, and new hopes. The twist was not a dramatic event, but the silent process of accepting the past and finding a way to live fully, something that felt impossible for both of them years ago. Love and loss continued to be a part of Alessa's life, but she has discovered a new way to coexist with those feelings, a way that has brought her not only healing, but also the strength to live for herself and for those she has loved.
By the end of this story, we see how an unexpected gesture can change lives and how sometimes the answers we seek aren't just in what we've lost, but in who we become when we face our pain. The journey of our protagonist and the mysterious man shows us that even in the hardest situations, we can find ways to forgive, overcome, and move forward. It's a lesson about how life, with all its losses, can still offer redemption and a new chance to start over. Have you ever thought about how you would handle something as unexpected as that check? What did you think of this story and its final revelation? We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss future stories. Give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to check out the next recommended video by clicking on the card appearing on your screen now. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.